Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha in Volume 5, which is titled The First Stage of Enlightenment, Stream Enterer. Today we're going to be studying chapters 31 through 40, and all these chapters are to help you to move closer and closer to this enlightened mental state, and specifically the first stage of enlightenment, where you're gathering up all the teachings that you need and the understanding and the wisdom to be able to make your way to that first stage of enlightenment. And it's not just this book, right? There's 4 books before this. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then now 5, which all of this together is what's going to get you to that first stage of enlightenment. So welcome to all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. The way that we do this program is I invite anyone in Zoom to be able to volunteer to read for any of the chapters that we're studying by just electronically raising your hand, and then I'll be able to see that, and you'll be able to unmute yourself, and then you can read a particular chapter. And then after that, I'll share some teachings on that chapter, and then I'll open up to any and all questions that you guys have. Whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you can ask questions by putting your questions in the comment section, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So is there anyone who would like to volunteer to read this first chapter? Okay, it looks like Pat. Let's see. Sorry, Pat, it looks like I can't quite click the button. Are you unmuted there?
I am.
Oh, okay. There's something new on my screen. I thought it's not really letting me do what I used to do, but you're unmuted, so perfect.
Okay. The noble method is to understand dependent origination. And what is the noble method that he has clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom? Here, householder, the noble disciple attends carefully to dependent origination itself thus. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the elimination of this, that is eliminated. That is, with ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be. With volitional formations as condition, consciousness. With consciousness as condition, name and form. With name and form as condition, the 6 sense bases. With the 6 sense bases as condition, contact. With contact as condition, feeling. With feeling as condition, craving. With craving as condition, clinging. With clinging as condition, existence. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the cause of this whole mass of discontentedness. But with the remainderless fading away and elimination of ignorance, unknowing of true reality, comes elimination of volitional formations, choices, and decisions. With the elimination of volitional formations, elimination of consciousness. With the elimination of consciousness comes elimination of name and form. With the elimination of name and form comes elimination of the 6 sense bases. With the elimination of the 6 sense bases comes elimination of contact. With the elimination of contact comes elimination of feeling. With the elimination of feeling comes elimination of craving. With the elimination of craving comes elimination of clinging. With the elimination of clinging comes elimination of existence. With the elimination of existence comes elimination of birth. With the elimination of birth comes elimination of aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair is eliminated. Such is the elimination of this whole mass of discontentedness. This is the noble method that he has clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So we studied this 2 weeks ago as part of chapter 14 of this same book. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this again because you've had about 2 weeks to kind of look at this and study it and think about it, work on independently verify it. So I'm just going to share it with you kind of in an overview fashion, where last time I went through it in a lot of detail. So first, what the Buddha is sharing here is what's called the wisdom of entailment, where you're starting to learn about how when this thing exists, that thing comes to be, or with the arising of this, that arises. It's seeing this cause and effect, or this action and result. This is where the Buddha is a real master of that, of showing you how when something exists, this next thing is going to happen. Where when you kill, you're going to experience these unwholesome results. When you steal, you're going to experience these unwholesome results, or sexual misconduct, or lying, or taking intoxicants. He's showing this cause and effect all the way throughout his entire teachings. This is the natural laws that you're awakening to, the natural laws of existence. And then also, when this thing doesn't exist, then that thing doesn't come to be. Or with the elimination of this thing is eliminated. So one way to think about this without even relating it to the teachings of the Buddha is to understand that because we learned a certain language, whether it's English or something else, we were able to apply for a job. By applying for a job, we were able to get a job interview. By getting a job interview, we were able to secure a job. By securing a job, we were able to get an income. By getting an income, we were able to purchase clothing. By purchasing clothing, we're able to go out into the world and actually interact with people and have friends. So now when you have a problem, you're able to talk with friends, right? So it's because of learning language that there's this whole series of events, this whole cascading of events, that because this exists, this thing came to be, meaning you can have friends. Whereas if you don't know language, if it doesn't exist, if you can't communicate and speak in a certain language, you can't get a job. You can't get a job interview. You can't get an income. You can't purchase clothing. You can't actually make friends. So the Buddha is showing you through wisdom of entailment this cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. But then he takes it into detail with dependent origination, this highest, most ultimate truth of his teachings, where he's helping you to be able to see that because of ignorance, or this unknowing of true reality, that the mind experiences making choices and decisions, or volitional formations. The mind makes decisions through this ignorance. And now that's going to lead to a consciousness. And the reason why is because as long as the mind lacks wisdom, then there's still going to be craving, desire, attachment in the mind. As long as there's craving, that's the fire, that's the spark that's going to lead to the next consciousness. It's just like a fire that if it had logs on it, that would be the fuel. And now there's a spark that comes off of the fire and the wind carries it, it lands, and now it ignites a new fire. It's a brand new fire. It's the same thing that if your mind has this unknowing of true reality, this ignorance, then all these other conditions are going to exist in the mind, and the mind's making all these unwise decisions. And one of the unwise decisions is to not get to enlightenment. So that means craving, desire, attachment is still in the mind, and now it's going to be the spark that leads to this next consciousness being formed. And now when the consciousness is formed, it's going to need to find a name and form, because the consciousness is the mind. So when there's a mind in existence, it's going to need to find a physical body. That name and form is the physical body. And now with that mind coming into the physical body, it's going to grow the 6 sense bases. We do that inside the womb. As early as 2 weeks and as late as 6 weeks, we start to form the 6 sense bases inside the womb. And now those 6 sense bases are going to start experiencing contact. And now as long as there's contact through those 6 sense bases, there's going to be feeling that's going to be experienced, these conditioned feelings. Because when the contact is coming in through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself, then the mind's going to see it as either agreeable contact or disagreeable contact. And now there's going to be pleasant feelings, painful feelings are neither painful nor pleasant. And then there's this craving, this longing, yearning, looking outside yourself for satisfaction. And then when you get that craving fulfilled and you get those pleasant feelings, those conditional happiness, excitement, and others, the mind's going to then cling to it. Where craving is looking external and longing, yearning for something, the clinging or the attachment is holding on to it. In the beginning classes, I described this as one thing, but it's actually two separate things. It's the craving, the longing, yearning for something external, the wanting things to be a certain way, and then once the mind gets that, it clings to it, it holds on to it, it doesn't want to let go. And now, because of that, the mind is experiencing, and this being is experiencing existence. Then once there's an existence, that being is going to be birthed into the world. When a being is born, then there's going to be aging and death. This is impermanence, that this body is impermanent. There's going to be this consistent aging, and there's going to be this death that every single being is going to experience. If a being is born, meaning it's arisen, it's going to have to cease to exist, because whenever something arises, it's going to cease to exist. And as long as there's birth and aging and death, there's going to be sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. This is how the whole mass of discontentedness comes about. So it's because of ignorance that craving continues to exist in the mind. This craving and clinging leads to this whole mass of discontentedness. Okay, so this is describing the life cycle of how a being experiences coming into the world and also experiences discontentedness. This is like the highest, most ultimate truth, where the Four Noble Truths gives you a window into it. This is giving you the detailed work, right? So one of the ways to think about this is, in your past lives, you had certain ignorance and volitional formations. And because of that, it's produced a consciousness that has now found a name and form. It has formed the 6 sense bases, and it's experiencing contact through these 6 sense bases. Then there's going to be these feelings that are occurring. As you experience those feelings, then the mind's going to have this longing, yearning of this craving. Then the mind's going to cling to those pleasant feelings, wanting them to be permanent. Then there's going to be this existence where the being has come into the world through the womb, and now it's birthed out of the womb. There's going to be aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. And this is why when we first come out of our mom's womb, that we start crying right away, because we have craving. Because we were in there, we were with the umbilical cord, everything was perfect, we had this whole place to ourselves, we were getting food pumped in, we didn't really have to do anything at all, just sit there. But then as soon as we got pushed out into the world, or surgery brought us into the world, we experienced that first real big impermanence of coming out into the world. And because we craved to be inside mom's womb, we cried. We were discontent from the very beginning of life because of that craving. But it all goes back to the ignorance. It's because of the lack of wisdom that has led to all these other sequence of events. So what the Buddha is describing down here is that with the elimination of this ignorance, meaning that we cultivate wisdom to understand the truth, then we will eliminate those unwise decisions of volitional formations, which will then eliminate each one of those succeeding events, where we're no longer going to continue to experience continuous birth over and over and over again, and discontentedness over and over again. And when you're arising wisdom and you see your discontentedness shrinking, you'll have more and more confidence in this whole entire dependent origination. But what you would like to do is independently verify each individual aspect of this, because what the Buddha is explaining to you up here and towards the bottom is that a noble disciple, meaning a deep practitioner, that's what we would call that person today, a very deep, well-practiced practitioner, someone who's really penetrated into the teachings, closely and carefully attends to dependent origination, meaning that they've understood it and pay attention to it very closely. And that's one of the things that an individual needs in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment. Because not only does this help you to be able to confirm the cycle of rebirth and helps you to understand what's the real problem here of ignorance being the problem, then you understand what the real solution is cultivation of wisdom. And then you can understand why the Buddha never taught any rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship, because none of that leads to wisdom. So as soon as you see rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship as part of anything that people are calling Buddhist, you know right away this isn't the Buddhist teachings, because he's guiding you to dismantle dependent origination, and you can't do that through rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. You need to be able to eliminate the ignorance through cultivation of wisdom. So the same thing down here toward the bottom, he just kind of summarizes it and says, okay, this is the noble method that someone who's a deep practitioner has clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom. So you're going to need to go through this and remember the steps and remember what each one of these things are, so that you can then independently verify it, and then you can actually dismantle it as well through the cultivation of wisdom. So let me know what questions you guys have here. This is Volume 5, Chapter 31. You can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay, so I guess you guys must be understanding this to a certain degree. So let's move on to the next one. At any point that you guys are studying this, either on your own or otherwise, and you would like help, just feel free to let me know so that you guys can be sure you understand it. Is there someone who would like to read Chapter 32? Okay, Samantha, go ahead, ma'am.
A little bit of soil in the fingernail. Monks, what do you think which is more, the little bit of soil that I have taken up in my fingernail, or this great earth? Venerable Sir, the great earth is more. The little bit of soil that the perfectly enlightened one has taken up in his fingernail is insignificant. Compared to the great earth, that little bit of soil is not calculable, does not bear comparison, does not amount even to a fraction. So too, monks, for a noble disciple, a person accomplished in view who has made the breakthrough, the discontentedness that has been destroyed and eliminated is more, while that which remains is insignificant. Compared to the former mass of discontentedness that has been destroyed and eliminated, the latter is not calculable, does not bear comparison, does not amount even to a fraction, as there is a maximum of 7 more lives. He is one who understands as it really is. This is discontentedness. This is the cause of discontentedness. This is the elimination of discontentedness. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Therefore, monks, an effort should be made to understand. This is discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the cause of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the elimination of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness.
All right, thank you, ma'am. So the Buddha, when he taught, everything he taught was oral. And there's essentially 3 things you can do when you're teaching an oral tradition and nothing's being written down because the technology didn't exist. There's essentially 3 things you can do in order to help people to remember your teachings. Is 1, you can give list. This is why we have the 10 fetters, the 4 noble truths, the 5 precepts, the 7 factors of enlightenment, the Eightfold Path, all these different numbers list, because if you're trying to remember the 7 factors of enlightenment and you've got 6 that you could remember, you just know there's a 7th one. What is it? What is it? You're trying to remember it. So giving list is one way to help people remember your teachings. The other way is to repeat what you're saying. Repeat it more than one time. That's why we have 45 volumes of books, because the Buddha repeated things over and over and over again. And even in this discourse, you can see where he repeated himself. The last 2 paragraphs, he repeated essentially the same thing, and that's the way to help kind of imprint it and allow someone's mind to absorb it. And then the third way is that you tell stories. And if you can tell stories, people can relate what you're teaching to that story, and they'll tend to remember the story. So here the Buddha is telling this story, essentially, this analogy, where he's saying, what do you think is more, right? This little bit of soil that's taken up in his fingernail, or all the soil of all the great earth? Well, of course, the students reply back that, that soil is so insignificant under your fingernail compared to all the soil of all the earth. And the Buddha says, so too, monks, a person who's penetrated his teachings deeply, that noble disciple, a person accomplished in view, right? Someone accomplished in view has made their way to essentially the first stage of enlightenment, and they've made the breakthrough, meaning that they've studied the Four Noble Truths and they fully understand the Four Noble Truths and they've independently verified them. Whenever he's talking about a breakthrough, that's what he's talking about, is the Four Noble Truths, is breaking through to that. Because before you understand the Four Noble Truths, we walk around with this ignorance or this unknowing of true reality, believing that everybody else is making us angry. Right? That's what we all kind of walked around with for such a long time. But when you penetrate through those Four Noble Truths, you have this real breakthrough. And now you're sitting in a position where you can actually solve this problem because you actually understand the cause of it. So the Buddha is saying a person accomplished in view has made this breakthrough. The discontentedness that has been destroyed, meaning eliminated, is the discontentedness that has been destroyed and eliminated is more than that which remains, right? So he's relating all the soil of all the earth. That's the discontentedness that has been eliminated and destroyed, while this little bit of soil under his fingernail, that's the representing the discontentedness that still remains in the mind of someone who's in the first stage of enlightenment. So depending on where you guys are in your journey, you might have already noticed this, that your discontentedness has significantly diminished and decreased over time. And if you're still making your way to the first stage of enlightenment, you might still have even noticed a decreasing of your discontentedness. But in comparison to your discontentedness when you were off the path to enlightenment, to when you're in that first stage of enlightenment, it's a mere fraction of what it once was. And that's what the Buddha is explaining to you here. And I've explained this to you guys in the past as well. So the Buddha is saying, okay, because of this, then an individual should make an effort to understand the Four Noble Truths. That's what he's pointing to here. This isn't the Four Noble Truths themselves. This is just a summarized way that he will point to the Four Noble Truths. Whenever he's talking about the Four Noble Truths, he will talk about them in a summary version like this, and then that's essentially pointing you to that teaching of the Four Noble Truths so that you can penetrate that in detail. Because the detailed teachings of the Four Noble Truths is more extensive than this. This is just four simple statements that is a summary to help you be able to know to go look at the Four Noble Truths and make that effort to understand them. Because by having that breakthrough and being able to get accomplishment in view, which we studied accomplishment in view last class, there was those multiple discourses that were put together that is accomplishment in view. And now having accomplishment in view and having had this breakthrough to understanding the Four Noble Truths, this individual has the ability to now make their way to the first stage of enlightenment along with other teachings. And now getting to that first stage of enlightenment, your discontentedness would be just a mere fraction of what it once was. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Looks like Janae has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
So with the second stage of enlightenment, that's where it says like that things are like greatly thinned, but it doesn't say that in the first stage of enlightenment. And this sounds like greatly thinned, so I'm kind of confused.
This is that the discontentedness has been thinned out, but in terms of the fetters, that's what the second stage of enlightenment is that you've thinned out sensual desire and ill will. But even getting into the first stage of enlightenment, you would have eliminated personal existence view, doubt, and wrong behavior and observances, and you would have been working to a certain degree on some of these other fetters without maybe even realizing it, because when you implement the Eightfold Path, this is a core central teaching that's going to help reduce all the fetters. You need that as a foundational teaching. So you're working to eliminate all discontentedness through the Eightfold Path, but you're really targeting each one of these fetters as you're progressing on the path. So getting into the second stage of enlightenment, you will have greatly thinned your sensual desire and ill will. But here what the Buddha is talking about is discontentedness itself. Because by getting rid of personal existence view, you would have eliminated a certain amount of discontentedness. By getting rid of doubt, that would have helped you. And then wrong behavior and observances, those are the three fetters that you would have eliminated, and you would have still decreased some of the other fetters as well. Because by the time you get to the first stage of enlightenment, you're practicing things like the 5 precepts effortlessly and all the way 100% all the time, and you're practicing a lot of these other teachings very closely. So that's why your discontentedness would have shrunk significantly. But in terms of the central desire and ill will, that doesn't get greatly thinned until you're in the second stage of enlightenment. But it will still have thinned out to a certain amount, but not greatly thin, but it would have been reduced to a certain amount even to get into the first stage of enlightenment.
So the reason why this is so big for a streamer is because the discontentedness that he's talking about is so kind of like vague in a sense, where it's just kind of like everything compiled together kind of thins out.
Yeah, if you're practicing the Eightfold Path, even getting into the jhanas, and even before the jhanas, you'll notice a decrease in your discontentedness. But here in the first stage of enlightenment, you're going to notice a significant decrease. If you look at the discontentedness you experience in the first stage of enlightenment versus what you were experiencing when you were off the path to enlightenment, this is like night and day comparison, because there's been some work that an individual has done in training their mind. But they're still not at that point of what a person in the second stage of enlightenment would be experiencing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let me know if you guys have any other questions. All right, I'm not seeing anything anywhere. So let's move on to the next one, which is chapter 33. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, looks like Samantha. Go ahead, ma'am.
The achievement of other communities cannot compare with the achievement of a noble disciple. Monks, suppose that a man would place on Sinnaru, the king of mountains, 7 grains of gravel the size of mung beans. What do you think, monks, which is more, the 7 grains of gravel the size of mung beans that have been placed there, or Sinnaru, the king of mountains? Venerable sir, Sinnaru, the king of mountains, is more. The 7 grains of gravel the size of mung beans are insignificant. They do not amount to 100th part, or 1,000th part, or 100,000th part of Sinnaru, the king of mountains. So too, monks, the achievements of ascetics, Brahmins, and wanderers of other communities do not amount to 100th part, or 1,000th part, or 100,000th part of the achievement of a noble disciple, a person accomplished in view who has made the breakthrough. So great in achievement, monks, is a person accomplished in view, so great in direct knowledge.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So talking about accomplishment in view is all those things that we were talking about last week. And there's a lot there that encompasses accomplishment in view. So that's a way to say, somebody who's really penetrated these teachings very deeply, they've experienced a lot of progress in the development of their mind through journeying on this path. Where, as I've mentioned to you guys before, there were other people who were claiming during the lifetime of the Buddha that it was their teachings that led to enlightenment. And there were other teachers who were teaching, and people were learning from those teachers, because not everybody understood that the Buddha was an actual Buddha. So people could come learn with him for a couple of days or a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and then they could leave, or even a couple of years, and they might leave away from him, not realizing that he's an actual Buddha and how wise it would be to actually study with him. People might just come for one day, listen to him, and then their mind's not ready to absorb what he has to say, and they might choose to leave. So what the Buddha is saying is these people who are studying in these other communities, they're not able to accomplish the things that the people that are learning with him are able to accomplish. Now keep in mind, what people were learning during that time was to hang themselves upside down from trees, pierce their body with metal implements, lay on beds of nails, starve the body. They thought that if you cause physical pain to the body, that this would produce enlightenment. And this, of course, is highly unwise, and it's not what produces enlightenment. It's through training the mind. And we have the same scenario today where you can look at different places where people are teaching, and they're not teaching the actual teachings. They might not be teaching to hang yourself upside down from trees, but sometimes they teach to stay in a certain fixed meditation position, and that, even though there's pain in your hip, to just breathe through it and things like this. If someone's not studying with the original words of the Buddha, they're not going to be able to actually get to enlightenment itself. So by studying with the original words and understanding the true teachings, penetrating them with wisdom, and having that breakthrough of the Four Noble Truths, this is what's going to lead to your attainments to be able to get to those jhanas, get to all the stages of enlightenment, and continue to progress to enlightenment itself. Without those things, you wouldn't be able to actually make progress on the path. So it looks like Janae has a question. If anyone else has a question, just let me know through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or raise your hand in Zoom.
So, what is the achievement that he's talking about here?
This is the attainment. So whether you're attaining the first, second, third, or fourth jhana, or the first, second, third, or fourth stage of enlightenment, those are the achievements that one is experiencing. There's other attainments too besides these, but these are like the core ones that everybody will experience. But then there's some other attainments as well. So these achievements are the progress to the condition of the mind as you're moving through these various phases and the various stages of enlightenment.
So basically, like the ascetics and the Brahmins and the wanderers were all trying to get to these achievements, basically, but he was the only one that could like really figure out how to get there tangibly.
Exactly. So there were other ascetics. Those are people who were essentially giving up worldly life and going into homelessness to be able to get to enlightenment. Brahmins are like Hindu priests, and then the wanderers are people who just like wander around going from community to community. The Buddha is saying these other people of these other communities, they're not going to be able to experience the same enhancement to the quality of their mind as the students who are learning from him, because they haven't made this breakthrough to the Four Noble Truths, and they haven't been able to get to accomplishment in view. Getting to accomplishment in view, which would require you to get established in right view with the Four Noble Truths, that's what's going to allow you to experience all these achievements or these attainments, this improvement to the condition of your mind, these enhanced qualities of mind. But if you're not learning the Four Noble Truths and all these other teachings to get to accomplishment in view, you wouldn't be able to have those breakthroughs and be able to experience those attainments.
Okay, and also, would you say that having direct knowledge and experience in itself is an achievement, or does it just contribute to the achievement?
It contributes to the achievement, because what direct knowledge is or experience is, this is like taking a certain situation that you've experienced in the past, and when you hear a teaching from the Buddha, you relate that teaching to something you've experienced in the past, and that's where you can verify it. Where like the Buddha teaches for something simple like eliminating harsh speech, where you can look at your life in the past, wherever you've been harsh and bitter and hostile to people, you've lost friends, maybe you've lost jobs. You're not that old yet, Janae, but for some of us, we can remember those times. I'm sure you've had some of those experiences where, you've lost jobs, you've lost friends, you've damaged relationships with neighbors and all these other things. You can look at these teachings of the Buddha and you can just know how wise they are because of your own direct experience, your own direct knowledge, looking at the troubles and difficulties you've had and how he's teaching you this better way of life. But then you can also look at this way that he's teaching, and in situations where you've done those things without even realizing that you were practicing his teachings, you're like, wow, things were going really well when I was doing that in that relationship. Maybe I should get back to that. So this is the direct knowledge or experience that you're having to independently verify the teachings. This is the reflection. So there's the learning and the intellectual understanding and examining, investigating. The reflection is the independent verification. That's where direct knowledge comes in, is that you look at your own direct experiences in life, you reflect on those in relationship to the teachings, and now that's where you're like, whoa, there's a lot of truth to this teaching. Let me start practicing this and see if it actually works. And now you start practicing and you're like, whoa, when I speak gentle to people, yeah, things work so much better. Isn't this amazing? And now you know the truth. That's how you get to truth, is through learning, reflecting, and practicing. And it's your direct knowledge or experience that's going to allow you to be able to do that, because you can reflect on the things that you've done well, the things you haven't done well, and you can see the Buddha's explaining it perfectly.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter. This is chapter 34. Looks like Pat would like to read this one. Go ahead, sir.
A noble one with developed sense basis. And how, Ananda, is one a noble one with developed sense basis? Here, Ananda, when a monk sees a form with the eye, hears a sound with the ear, smells an odor with the nose, tastes a flavor with the tongue, touches a physical object with the body, recognizes a mental object with the mind, there arises in him what is agreeable. There arises what is disagreeable. there arises what is both agreeable and disagreeable. If he should aspire, may I reside perceiving the unrepulsive in the repulsive. He resides perceiving the unrepulsive in the repulsive. If he should aspire, may I reside perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive. He resides perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive. If he should aspire, may I reside perceiving the unrepulsive in the repulsive and the unrepulsive. He resides perceiving the unrepulsive in that. If he should aspire, may I reside perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive and the repulsive. He resides perceiving the repulsive in that. If he should aspire, may I, avoiding both the repulsive and unrepulsive, reside in equanimity, mindful and fully aware. He resides in equanimity towards that, mindful and fully aware. Ananda, that is how one is a noble one with developed sense basis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. The Buddha's talking about how the mind that has become wise is actually seeing the unrepulsive in the repulsive. Okay, so this deals with the six sense bases. That when the untrained mind experiences something that's repulsive, the reason why it's repulsive is because of your cravings. That you're walking down the street, you get an odor of the sewer, and now you're repulsed by it, and you want to push this away. Okay, that's what the unenlightened, untrained mind does, is you smell the sewer and you push it away, and the mind is horrified, like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? The mind starts complaining or whatever. But what you would like to do is you'd like to start developing the perception of unrepulsive in the repulsive, meaning that you're looking at the positive side of things. You're looking at the bright side of things, right? So I know this is going to be funny and you guys might be a little bit grossed out, but sometimes me and my son, when we're around each other, he will actually fart. And I will say, oh, thank you for scenting the air. That's very kind of you for scenting the air in that way, right? So it's kind of like seeing the unrepulsive in the repulsive. Instead of like, oh my gosh, you're horrible. How dare you fart? Oh, it's going to make the room smell horrible. Oh, right? Instead of being complaining and negative, you develop this perception of the unrepulsive in the repulsive. Then the Buddha talks about perceiving the repulsive in the unrepulsive. So now the unrepulsive would be like something pleasurable, right? So now when you see something pleasurable and that the mind is longing, yearning for it, you understand like, no, let me restrain my mind. Let me pull the mind back and don't allow it to get these conditioned feelings because of it, right? And that's what you'll need to be able to do. And then he talks here about resides perceiving the repulsive in that. Here, I think he's just talking about this unrepulsive in that, meaning that this thing is not repulsive. It's essentially what it looks like he's talking about here, is that I reside perceiving unrepulsive in the repulsive and the unrepulsive, right? So just kind of looking at the brighter side of things here. And he's going through these other statements here, essentially getting to the same thing, but ultimately what he's getting to is he's talking about, okay, the mind can avoid both repulsive and unrepulsive, meaning that you're not seeing this contact that's coming through the six sense bases as agreeable or disagreeable. Whenever he's talking about repulsive, you can think about that as disagreeable. You can think about unrepulsive as agreeable. Or another way you can think about is the repulsive is that what is going to typically produce the painful conditioned feelings. Or the unrepulsive is that what's typically going to produce the pleasant feelings. So instead of looking at it as agreeable and disagreeable or repulsive and unrepulsive, reside in equanimity, meaning calmness and composure. The mind is mindful and fully aware, that you have full awareness of the mind. It's like, whoa, I know that sewer smells horrible, but the mind doesn't have to react to it in a negative way. You can just reside with your mind being content and equanimitous, meaning calm and composed, fully aware. He resides in equanimity towards that, mindful and fully aware. Not just the unpleasant things that you might have viewed as unpleasant or repulsive in the past, but even the pleasant things, even the things that are typically agreeable, instead of like, oh, wow, 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 let me do that, oh, wow, that's so amazing, and the mind wants to grab onto it with craving and clinging, instead, just reside with equanimity. It's like, wow, that's a really nice car, and I think I'm going to buy that car. Okay, that's going to help me go from point A to point B, and it looks really nice, and it drives really nice. Let me go ahead and consider getting this car, right? Instead of like, oh man, I just can't wait to get into the showroom and talk to the salesperson and drive down the road and show my friends how amazing I am. This is the mind craving and clinging and the ego coming in. Instead, just reside with equanimity. Do each thing with calmness and composure. Enjoy what you're doing, but understand that all of these things are impermanent and there's no reason to grab onto it and cling onto it. Okay, so let me know what questions you guys have here. Oftentimes people are a little bit challenged with this unrepulsive and repulsive, but oftentimes if you just replace that with agreeable and disagreeable, that will help you to work your way through this discourse. So it looks like Marcy has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. So I had an experience the other day, a client that I cared for, she had moved her bowels, and she was like, oh, this stinks, this is so bad. And the mind just saw it as poop. So I wasn't really feeding into her things, and I said, well, it's just temporary, and I just flushed it down the toilet and I continued cleaning her. Is that the mind actually starting to understand that, it was just poop. It was just poop. That's what the mind thought. It was just poop.
Yeah, it's just an impermanent situation. Let's just deal with it. I don't have to see it as agreeable or disagreeable. It's just a substance. It's just feces. That's it. And that's what you would ultimately like to get to.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. Nope, don't see any other questions. So let's go to the next chapter. Here you can see I described this one quite a lot because you need to really walk through this one and really understand multiple aspects of it. So if you haven't read that yet, that'll really help you to also walk through that. So now we're at chapter 35. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Marcy, go ahead, ma'am.
Difference in understanding of teachings between a stream enterer and an arahant. First disclosure. Monks, there are these 5 aggregates subject to clinging. What 5? The form aggregate is subject to clinging. The feeling aggregate is subject to clinging. The perception aggregate is subject to clinging. The volitional formation, choices, decision aggregate is subject to clinging. The consciousness aggregate is subject to clinging. When monks, a noble disciple, understands as they really are the cause and the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of these 5 aggregates subject to clinging. Monks, then he is called a noble disciple who is a stream enterer, no longer bound to the netherworld, fixed in destination, with enlightenment as his destination. When monks, having understood as they really are the cause and the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, the escape in the case of these 5 aggregates subject to clinging, a monk is liberated by non-clinging. Then he is called a monk who is an arahant, one whose taints are destroyed, who has lived the holy life, done what had to be done, laid down the burden, reached his own goal, completely destroyed the fetters of existence, one completely liberated through the final knowledge, wisdom.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So here, this is the difference between understanding the teachings between a stream enterer, someone in the first stage of enlightenment, and an arahant, someone who's actually enlightened in the 4th stage of enlightenment. And this is the first discourse. What the Buddha is saying here is that a stream enterer, someone who's in that first stage of enlightenment, they have understood the 5 aggregates. They understand what they are, right? And they understand that it's unwise to cling to these because you have physical form, you have feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and a consciousness. These are the 5 things that make a living being, and each being has these 5 things. So an individual who's in the first stage of enlightenment understands what these things are, right? So they understand these 5 things in these aggregates. But the difference is that an enlightened being, having already understood them, they're actually no longer clinging. They've actually eliminated the clinging to those 5 aggregates. And they've eliminated other things too. So this is where you need to know the teachings of the Buddha in totality. Somebody might look at this and be like, oh, this is the only thing I need to do is eliminate clinging to the 5 aggregates. That's not actually true. You need to eliminate a lot of the other things that the Buddha is teaching you. You need to eliminate those 10 fetters. You need to eliminate craving and clinging to anything and everything. So as an individual whose taints are destroyed, right? But this is one aspect of an individual who, having gotten to enlightenment with the completely destroyed fetters, right? That not only are those things happening, that they've eliminated their clinging to the 5 aggregates. So that's why getting to the first stage of enlightenment is so helpful, because you need to understand what these 5 aggregates are, because you wouldn't be able to actually eliminate your clinging to them if you didn't understand what they are. So you might think of these as 5 criteria or 5 collections or 5 elements. These are the 5 things that make a living being a living being. And you can independently verify that for yourself, because you know what a living being is. You're a living being. You can see that you have all 5 of these. And then you can take a item that is not a living being, like the electronic device that you have, and you can see that it doesn't have all 5 of the 5 aggregates. And this is how you can independently verify what the Buddha taught. And you can see his definition of a living being has held up for 2,500 years. So if it's held up that long, it's going to hold up for the rest of time. And you can have confidence in independently verifying this, that this is indeed describing a living being. So let me know what questions you guys have here. The difference between a person in the first stage of enlightenment having understood the 5 aggregates versus somebody who's actually enlightened, who would have eliminated their clinging to these 5 aggregates, among other things. So Janae, you have a question? Go ahead, ma'am.
So what is like the difference between a stream enterer who understands it and an arahant that has understood it to the point of not clinging to it?
So an arahant isn't going to experience discontentedness related to these things, but an individual who is a stream enterer still will, because they're still clinging. So an individual who is a stream enterer clinging to their form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness, they're going to still experience discontentedness related to this. So let's just take one like volitional formations. If you made a decision that you would like to travel to Australia, and if you were in the first stage of enlightenment and you showed up to the airport and your flight was delayed, there's the potential that you would still get discontent in that situation, because you're clinging to your decision to go to Australia. Now you're frustrated that you can't go because your flight's delayed or canceled. Where an enlightened being, they would show up to the airport, their flight's canceled, they wouldn't have any discontentedness whatsoever. So that's a difference of still having clinging to these 5 aggregates and not having clinging, is that there's no discontentedness once there's no clinging to them.
So basically, like a stream enterer would be starting to understand these things, whereas the arahant would be like fully implementing them.
The stream enterer would understand what the 5 aggregates are in detail, but they wouldn't have eliminated their clinging yet.
Okay, thank you.
They would still be clinging to these 5 aggregates potentially. Okay, let me see what other questions we have. All right, we don't have any other questions. So now let's move to the next chapter. And by the way, this cause, disappearance, gratification, danger, and escape, I have it right here. In each one of these chapters where the Buddha is talking about this, I'm explaining to you the cause of the problem is craving, desire, attachment. The disappearance is the universal truth of impermanence and understanding that. The gratification is understanding the unenlightened mind's fetter or taint or pollution of sensual desire. The danger in all of this is that the mind can experience this discontentedness, these conditioned feelings. And the escape from all of this is the Eightfold Path. So what the Buddha is saying up there is that an individual would understand the cause, disappearance, gratification, danger, and escape. So you would need to understand all of these as it relates to each of these aggregates. So I just gave you one example, but you could come up with your own example to be able to see what the Buddha is talking about here and be able to independently verify it. Okay, let's go to chapter 36. Is there someone who would like to read this one? You guys are quiet today. All right, Samantha and Marcy. Go ahead, Samantha. Your hand went up first.
Difference in understanding of teachings between a stream enterer and an arahant. Second discourse. Monks, there are these 6 sense bases. What 6? The eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. One monk's, a noble disciple, understands, as they really are, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of these 6 sense bases. Then he is called a noble disciple who is a stream enterer, no longer bound to the netherworld, fixed in destination, with enlightenment as his destination. Monks, there are these 6 sense bases. What 6? The eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. One monk's, having understood as they really are the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of these 6 sense bases, a monk is liberated by non-clinging. Then he is called a monk who is an arahant, one whose taints are destroyed, who has lived the holy life, done what had to be done, laid down the burden, reached his own goal, completely destroyed the fetters of existence, one completely liberated through final knowledge, wisdom.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So here, very similar to the last discourse, but here the Buddha is saying a person in the first stage of enlightenment, they understand the 6 sense bases, they understand them, but they're still having the longing, yearning through them. They're still having the clinging in relationship to these 6 sense bases. But an arahant, an individual who's actually enlightened, they're no longer longing, yearning, and clinging through these sense bases. That's the difference here. And if you remember back to the beginning of this book, the Buddha was giving you a discourse explaining how a stream enterer will understand the 5 aggregates and understand the 6 sense bases. And now here he's showing the difference between the first stage of enlightenment and an arahant is that the arahant has eliminated any kind of clinging through these 6 sense bases or clinging to the aggregates themselves. That's the difference, is that their minds have been liberated and free. It's no longer clinging through these things. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Looks like Janae has another question. Go ahead, ma'am.
So this is more of a general question, which is why in these discourses is he comparing a stream enterer to an arahant and not something like the second or third stage of enlightenment?
Because the ultimate goal is to get to enlightenment itself. So it's important to be able to do that, because in the process between the first stage of enlightenment and arahant, you'll be eliminating clinging and craving here and there, but you can't really say like in the second stage of enlightenment that it's so radically different than the first stage, other than that there's been a more significant decrease of discontentedness. But the difference between a first stage and an arahant, there's a big difference there in terms of what the mind is experiencing and the wisdom that an individual has. So the Buddha is always going to guide you to enlightenment, to being an arahant. In those intermediary stages, there's not as much significance of a difference. So he's not going to compare those and help you be able to see that. He's going to help you to be able to see, well, what is the ultimate goal? And this is where you need to be able to get to in order to get to that goal.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, looks like Mayuli has a question on Facebook. Going back to the previous chapter, once a practitioner reaches the first stage, should the practitioner not cling to form since they would have eliminated the first fetter? Am I missing something here? So the personal existence view, having eliminated the view that there's anything here that could be a self, a personal existence view. That's your personal existence view, having the view that something could be a self. Then eliminating the clinging to it is what you experience as you're continuing to eliminate central desire and some of these other fetters. So it's having the view, having understood that this physical form is not you, that these perceptions are not you, these feelings are not you, the volitional formations are not you, that the consciousness, the mind is not you. You can understand that intellectually, but having not eliminated the actual clinging to it as of yet. That's the understanding that you need there, Mayuli. Okay, not seeing any other questions. Let me just check one more time. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. This is Chapter 37. Is there someone who would like to read this? Marcy, you had your hand up. Yeah, there you go. Okay, go ahead, ma'am.
One who cultivates fully reaches fulfillment. One who cultivates is in part succeeds in part. Monks, every half moon more than 150 training guidelines come up for recitation. Klansmen who aspire for their own good train in these. These are all comprised within these 3 trainings. What 3? The training in the higher virtuous behavior, moral conduct, the training in the higher mind, mental discipline, the training in the higher wisdom. These are the 3 trainings in which all these is comprised. Here, monks, a monk fulfills virtuous behavior, concentration, and wisdom. He falls into wrongdoing in regard to the lesser and minor training guidelines and rehabilitates himself. For what reason? Because I have not said that he is incapable of this, but in regard to those training guidelines that are fundamental to the spiritual life. In practice of the spiritual life, his behavior is constant and steadfast. Having undertaken the training guidance, he trains in them. With the destruction of the taints, he realizes for himself with direct knowledge, experience in this very life, the taintless liberation of mind, the liberation by wisdom, and having entered upon it, he resides in it. If he does not attain and penetrate this with the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, he is an attainer of nibbana, enlightenment, between one life and the next. If he does not attain and pertain to this with the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, he is an attainer of nibbana, enlightenment, upon landing. If he does not attain and penetrate this with the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, he is an attainer of nibbana without extra effort. If he does not attain and penetrate this with the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, he is an attainer of nibbana with extra effort. If he does not attain and penetrate this with the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, he is one bound upstream, heading toward the heavenly realm. If he does not attain and penetrate this with the complete destruction of 3 fetters, and with the diminishing of craving, anger, and ignorance, unknowing of true reality, he is a once returner who, after coming back to this world only one more time, makes an end of all discontentedness. If he does not attain and penetrate this with the complete destruction of 3 fetters, he is one seed attainer who, after being reborn once more in human existence, makes an end of all of discontentedness. If he does not attain and penetrate this with the complete destruction of 3 fetters, he is a family-to-family attainer who, after roaming and wandering among wholesome families 2 or 3 times, makes an end of discontentedness. If he does not attain and penetrate this with the complete destruction of 3 fetters, he is a 7-time at most attainer who, after roaming and wandering among heavenly beings and humans 7 times at most, makes an end of discontentedness. Thus, monks, one who cultivates fully reaches fulfillment. One who cultivates in part succeeds in part. This training guidance, I say, is not unfruitful.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So what he's saying here is that if you just kind of pay attention to certain little sections of the teachings of the Buddha, you're only going to cultivate in parts, which means you're going to only succeed in parts. But if you fully cultivate the mind and you fully look at all the teachings and you're progressing through that, then you're going to be able to reach fulfillment, meaning reaching enlightenment itself. So this is where I usually share with people that it's unwise to really put your mind under a microscope as it relates to things like the jhanas, right? Sometimes I've seen people do this where they get so obsessed about the jhanas, like whether they're in the first or second jhana, where it's helpful to generally understand the jhanas and understand what each one of those jhanas are and what the qualities are in there, so that as you're making your way through the jhanas, you can see that that's occurring. But you're not interested in getting bogged down there where you're cultivating in parts, just looking at one piece and one piece and one piece. You know, I've seen people bogged down in the jhanas for many years, and they're probably still there. Not people that have learned with me, but people that have learned with other people. And this is because they're just cultivating in parts. They're just looking at the minutia of each individual attainment rather than looking at the total big picture, and then cultivating the mind fully to be able to reach enlightenment itself. So the Buddha is walking you through in a way that helps you to be able to see this. So this first part, he's just talking about how there's this chanting that I've shared with you guys that the Buddha did every 2 weeks, essentially, every half month with his students, where they would recite his training guidelines, essentially the Eightfold Path, but other things as well. That's what he's referring to here when he's talking about the training in the higher virtuous behavior, that's the moral conduct, the training in the higher mind, that's the mental discipline, and the training of the higher wisdom, this is the Eightfold Path. And he's saying, okay, these are the 3 trainings in which all this is comprised, meaning everything that he's teaching comes back to the Eightfold Path. That's the foundational teaching that you need to be able to learn and understand. Then he talks here about how if an individual falls into wrongdoing of some of the minor training guidelines, that they can observe that, they can notice that, and they can then aim to do better. That's what he's talking about by rehabilitates himself. That you might have been practicing the 5 precepts really well, but maybe you kind of missed a little thing here or there related to speech or something like that. You weren't lying, which was one of the major teachings, but it was something kind of a little bit more minor. Maybe you weren't speaking at the proper time in a certain situation, but you notice it. You realize that, I need to do that better next time in that conversation. That's rehabilitating yourself, cultivating the wisdom that's going to help you next time to do it better. Then he talks about here just kind of the individual aspects of developing the mind and kind of these parts of success, of how you can partially be gaining this progress along the way. He starts off talking about the most significant one, which is actually getting to enlightenment itself. That's where he says, with the destruction of the taints, this is an individual whose mind is completely liberated and their mind resides in that particular mental state. But then he goes through all the others as well, and he even splits apart the first stage of enlightenment into the different pieces that he teaches: the 1 seed attainer, the family 2 attainer, and the 7 times at most attainer. So instead of putting each one of these things under a high degree of a microscope, understand generally what these things are, understand specifically what you're working towards and how to actually accomplish that. But don't get bogged down into being obsessed about each one of these things, because otherwise you're not going to be able to fully cultivate the mind to get to the ultimate goal, which is enlightenment itself. So it looks like Janae has a question. If there's anyone else, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Go ahead, ma'am.
So I had never heard about the family to family attainer. Is there more information about that?
Yeah, you can see this in the beginning of this book. We went through that, where he talks about these 3 different types of stream enterers. And he talks about one person who's a stream enterer who's a 1 seed attainer, meaning that they've only actually eliminated 3 fetters, but when they are reborn back into the human realm, they're going to get to enlightenment in that next life. It's similar to a 1-3 turner, but this individual is a stream enterer. A family to family attainer is someone who's going to be reborn for 2 or 3 more times in the human realm, and they're going to be reborn into wholesome families. And by being reborn into wholesome families, it actually makes it easier for you to be able to remove obstacles like having food, clothing, shelter, medical care, things like this. You're going to be around people who are doing more wholesome things, so your mind's going to lean towards enlightenment a bit more in those situations. So in this situation, if you die as a family attainer, you've eliminated the first 3 fetters, but you still need to come back 2 or 3 more times. But you're going to be reborn into wholesome families, which is going to make it better for you. So this is something that he teaches. You can see it. Essentially, it's the same exact thing in a different discourse, where he talks about all 3 of these. And then there's the 7 times at most attainer, who would be reborn no more than 7 times. And they're also coming back into the human realm as well, but they can be also reborn into the heavenly realm, and then either come back down into the human realm and get enlightened there, or they might have made their way up to a non-returner and then get to enlightenment from that existence in the heavenly realm as well. So it's mainly the same exact paragraph, but you can see it earlier in the book.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, you're welcome, Ayuli. Pleased to help you. She says, my answer that made the first fetter a lot more achievable. Okay. All right. So I don't see any other questions anywhere. So let's go on to the next one. But remember, Mayuli, you still need to eliminate the clinging to those 5 aggregates eventually, right? Okay. Is there anyone who would like to read this one? Okay. It looks like Pat's got that one. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. 7 kinds of persons found existing in the world similar to those in water. Monks, there are these 7 kinds of persons found existing in the world similar to those in water. What 7? 1. Here, some person has gone under once and remains under. 2. Some person has risen up and then goes under. 3. Some person has risen up and stays there. 4. Some person has risen up, sees clearly, and looks around. 5. Some person has risen up and is crossing over. 6. Some person has risen up and gained a firm foothold. 7. Some person has risen up, crossed over, and gone beyond, a Brahmin who stands on high ground. 1. And how, monks, is a person one who has gone under once and remains under? Here, some person possesses exclusively black, unwholesome qualities. In this way, a person is one who has gone under once and remains under. 2. And how is a person one who has risen up and then goes under? Here, some person has risen up, thinking. Good is confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is a sense of moral wrongdoing in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is moral concern in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is energy in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities. However, his confidence does not become stable or grow, but rather diminishes. His sense of moral wrongdoing, moral concern, energy, wholesome qualities, and wisdom does not become stable or grow, but rather diminishes. In this way, a person goes under, is one who has risen up and then goes under. 3. And how is a person one who has risen up and stays put? Here, some person has risen up. Good is confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is a sense of moral wrongdoing in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is moral concern in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is energy in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities. His confidence neither diminishes nor grows, it just stays put. His sense of moral wrongdoing, his moral concern, his energy, and his wisdom neither diminishes nor grows, it just stays put. In this way, a person is one who has risen up and stays put. 4. And how is a person one who has risen up, sees clearly, and looks around? Here, some right person has risen up. Good is confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is a sense of moral wrongdoing in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is moral concern in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is energy in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities. With the complete destruction of 3 fetters, this person is a stream enterer, no longer subject to rebirth in the lower world, fixed in destination, heading for enlightenment. It is in this way that a person is one who has risen up, sees clearly, and looks around. 5. And how is a person one who has risen up and is crossing over? Here, some person has risen up. Good is confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is a sense of moral wrongdoing in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is moral concern in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is energy in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities. With the complete destruction of 3 fetters and with the diminishing of craving, anger, and ignorance, this person is a once returner who, after coming back to this world only one more time, will make an end of discontentedness. It is in this way that a person is one who has risen up and is crossing over. 6. And how is a person one who has risen up and gained a firm foothold? Here, some person has risen up. Good is confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is a sense of moral wrongdoing in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is moral concern in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is energy in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities. With the complete destruction of the 5 lower feathers, he is of spontaneous birth in the heavenly realm due to attain final nibbana, there without returning from that world. It is in this way that a person is one who has risen up and gained a firm foothold. 7. And how is a person who has risen up, crossed over, and gone beyond a Brahmin who stands on high ground? Here, some person has risen up. Good is confidence in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is a sense of moral wrongdoing in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is moral concern in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is energy in cultivating wholesome qualities. Good is wisdom in cultivating wholesome qualities. With the destruction of the taints, he has realized for himself with direct knowledge in this very life the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, and having entered upon it, he resides in it. It is in this way that a person is one who has risen up, crossed over, and gone beyond, a Brahmin who stands on high ground. These monks are the 7 kinds of persons found existing in the world similar to those in water. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat. So here the Buddha is helping you to understand the 7 different types of individuals that you may come in contact with. This helps you to understand certain things that you might be experiencing. Whereas if you're like in a community of practitioners and there's like a few people that are there and it's like, wow, they're so energized, they're so excited about the teachings and learning, and they come to the temple maybe 3, 4, 5 times and then you don't see them anymore. This is helping you to understand why the Buddha is relating this to these types of individuals that are found in the water. And I'm not going to go through each one of them because I think that the Buddha is describing it very clear as he does with all of his teachings. And you guys probably are understanding this, but you might notice that certain people are like this. This first one is an individual who's just exclusively into unwholesome things. That's someone who has gone under, right? They just remain under the water because they're into exclusively unwholesome things. And then he describes these other types of individuals too. And you might have encountered some of these types of individuals in your journey, maybe even in our community of people that have gotten really excited about the teachings and talking about all the different teachings. Maybe they've come to 4 classes, 5, 10, what have you, and the next thing you know, you just don't see them anymore because they're impermanent. And the Buddha is explaining here that an individual's confidence isn't growing, right? In this third one, he's talking about how the person's confidence is neither diminishes nor grows. In the one before this, he talks about how their confidence doesn't actually grow at all. It actually diminishes. Here, he's talking about the confidence in the teachings, the confidence in the Buddha, right? So if an individual isn't really applying themselves in the teachings, they're not really growing and developing the mind, then they're not going to be able to grow their confidence. So even though they might be really jazzed about the teachings initially, that they haven't really applied themselves diligently to be able to learn and practice, so they're not seeing that progress. So therefore, their confidence doesn't grow. So the Buddha is going through and describing all these different individuals. And then this last one, we'll just talk about this one, is he's talking about essentially an individual who stands on this high ground, right? He's saying with the destruction of the taints, he has realized for himself with direct knowledge in this very life the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom. And having entered upon it, he resides in it. It is in this way that a person who is one who has risen up, crossed over, gone beyond, a Brahmin who stands on high ground, right? This is an individual who has gotten to this higher consciousness. That's what the Buddha is talking about. And again, he's using a story here because these are things that we're familiar with and that we can relate his teaching to this particular story, and then it can help you to actually remember this better. So let me know what questions you guys have on any of these. Again, I didn't go through all of them because I feel like that you guys can probably understand this pretty well, the way he's describing it, as is all of his teachings. But sometimes a teaching is connected to something else, where this one isn't necessarily connected to really too many other things. So let me know what questions you guys have by putting those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or raise your hand in Zoom. And Janae, you have a question? Go ahead, ma'am.
Can you go back up to the first one?
Sure.
Thank you.
Right here.
When it says some person possesses exclusively black, what does that mean?
He's using this color of black to mean like in the darkness, where they talk about walking to the light or enlightenment as this brightness, this whiteness. And, a lot of people have used these colors over time for discrimination and racism and things like that. None of that was happening during the lifetime of the Buddha, because he was living in a region of the world where everybody essentially looked exactly the same. There wasn't as much commingling back then because of the language differences and stuff like that. But nowadays people are using these things for racism and prejudice, discrimination and things like that. So sometimes when people see this, it kind of clicks that conditioning that they have in their mind about these things, and they maybe think the Buddha was talking in that way too. But even during his lifetime, they would refer to the darkness or the blackness as being in the unwholesome qualities, where one's walking towards the light as walking towards enlightenment. But I don't know if you're thinking this way, Janae. I can only imagine what you've been exposed to, because I know what I was exposed to growing up, that you might be thinking about kind of racism and prejudices and things like that, and that's not what the Buddha's talking about here at all.
I was actually thinking about Amy Winehouse's Back to Black, and I was like, is that what that means?
Yeah, I don't know Amy Winehouse.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, different generations, Janae. I think you're in your 20s, right? Yeah. All right, so let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. All right, I don't see any other questions. All right, so let's go to the next chapter. This is chapter 39. Let's see, I think this one is quite long if I remember correctly. Yeah, it's quite a few pages. If we need to have more than one person read, we could do that. This one's about 4 pages. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, looks like Samantha and Marcy's raised their hand. Samantha, if you need help with this, Marcy's probably willing to help out.
How about I do a page?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. 9 persons passing away with the residue remaining are freed from hell. On one occasion, the perfectly enlightened one was dwelling at Savatthi at Jedda's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Then in the morning, the Venerable Sariputta dressed, took his bowl and robe, and entered for alms food. It then occurred to him, it is still too early to walk for alms food in Savatthi. Let me go to the park of the wanderers of other communities. Then the Venerable Sariputta went to the park of the wanderers of other communities. He exchanged greetings with those wanderers, and when they had concluded their greetings and cordial talk, sat down one to one side. Now on that occasion, those wanderers had assembled and were sitting together when this conversation arose among them. Friends, anyone who passes away with the residue remaining is not freed from hell, the animal realm, or the realm of afflicted spirits. He is not freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. Then the Venerable Sariputta neither excited in nor rejected the statement of those wanderers, but rose from his seat and left thinking, I shall find out what the perfectly enlightened one has to say about this statement. Then when the Venerable Sariputta had walked for alms food in Savatthi, after his meal, on returning from his alms food round, he approached the perfectly enlightened one, paid homage to him, and sat down to one side. Here he reports verbatim the entire course of events and ends. I rose from my seat and left thinking, I shall find out what the perfectly enlightened one has to say about this statement. Who, Sariputta, are those unwise and unskillful wanderers of other communities, and who are those that know one with the residue remaining as one with the residue remaining? and one without residue remaining as one without residue remaining. These 9 persons, Sariputta, passing away with the residue remaining, are freed from hell, the animal realm, and the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. Marcy, if you'd like to step in here, you're welcome to read this. But before we do that, let me just kind of recap where we're at. That essentially there's this really close student of the Buddha called Sariputta. This is one of his very close students. And he was kind of hanging out in this park where there's other students from other communities. And I've mentioned this to you guys before, how the students of the Buddha would sometimes hang out with these other students from other teachers. And of course, that even happens nowadays, right? Like some of the students who learn with me go to retreats or go to a restaurant or some event, and they bump into other people who are studying with other students. Well, this topic of conversation came up where these other students were saying that there's individuals who have a residual remaining amount of clinging in their mind who are not freed from the lower realms. They're not freed from hell, animal realm, or afflicted spirits. And Sariputta didn't get excited, but didn't also reject that statement either, because he didn't know whether it was true or false, because he didn't have that wisdom. So he's like, I know what I'll do. I'll go talk to the Buddha. Well, that's probably what you would do too, right? If you ran into something and you knew you were studying with the Buddha, you'd be like, hey, let me go ask him. He should be able to sort this out for me. So after Sariputta returns back and he interacts with the Buddha, he asks this question to the Buddha and to find out what is the truth. And then the Buddha says, who, Sariputta, are those unwise and unskilled wanderers of other communities, and who are those that know one with a residual remaining as one with the residual remaining, and one without residual remaining as one without a residual remaining? What he's saying is, who has such a high degree of wisdom that they can actually determine whether somebody has a residual amount of clinging in their mind or not? Because even a Buddha isn't going to know 100% of whether somebody has residual clinging in their mind or not without actually questioning that person and asking questions. That they need to be able to observe that person for a period of time, and they need to be able to ask that person questions to know that information. So what the Buddha understands is like, hold on a second, those students of other teachers, they're not even going to be able to determine whether someone has residual clinging or not. They're not even going to be able to do that. So now the Buddha says, okay, Sariputta, let me give you 9 examples of an individual who has residual clinging in their mind, but they're actually freed from the animal realm, from that realm of hell, and the realm of afflicted spirits. I'll explain to you these 9 examples that will help you to be able to see what those other students were saying is untrue. So now the Buddha is going to give these 9 examples. And Marcy, would you like to pick it up here? Okay. Go ahead, ma'am.
What 9? 1. Here, Sariputta, some person fulfills virtuous behavior and concentration, but cultivates wisdom only to a moderate extent. With the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, this person is an attainer of nibbana between one life and the next. This is the first person passing away with a residual remaining, who is freed from hell, the animal realm, the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. 2. Again, some person fulfills virtuous behavior and concentration, but cultivates wisdom only to a moderate extent. With the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, this person is an attainer of nibbana upon landing. This is the second person passing away with residual remaining, who is freed from hell, the animal realm, the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. 3. Again, some person fulfills virtuous behavior and concentration, but cultivates wisdom only to a moderate extent. With the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, this person is an attainer of nibbana without extra effort. This is the third person passing away with residual remaining, who is freed from hell, the animal realm, the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. 4. Again, some person fulfills virtuous behavior and concentration, but cultivates wisdom only to a moderate extent. With the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, this person is an attainer of nibbana with extra effort. This is the fourth person, passing away with residual remaining, who is freed from hell, the animal realm, the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. 5, again, some person fulfills virtuous behavior and concentration, but cultivates wisdom only to a moderate extent. With the complete destruction of the 5 lower fetters, this person is one bound upstream, heading toward the heavenly realm. This is the first person passing away with residual remaining, who is freed from hell, the animal realm, the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. 6, does Janae want to read? Or I can continue.
I think she was raising her hand for a question.
Okay, perfect. 6, again, some person fulfills virtuous behavior, but cultivates concentration and wisdom only to a moderate extent. With the complete destruction of the 3 fetters, with the full diminishing of craving, anger, ignorance, this person is a once returner who, after coming back to this world only one more time, makes an end of all discontentedness. This is the 6th person, passing away with residual remaining, who is freed from hell, the animal realm, the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. 7, again, some person fulfills virtuous behavior, but cultivates concentration and wisdom only to a moderate extent, the complete destruction of 3 fetters. This person is a one-seed attainer who, after being reborn once more in the as a human being, makes an end of discontentedness. This is the 7th person, passing away with residual remaining, who is free from hell, the animal realm, the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. 8, again, some person fulfills virtuous behavior, but cultivates concentration and wisdom only to a moderate extent. With the complete destruction of 3 fetters, this person is a family-to-family attainer who, after roaming and wandering on among wholesome families 2 or 3 times, makes an end of discontentedness. This is the 8th person, passing away with residual remaining, who is freed from hell, the animal realm, the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. 9, again, some person fulfills virtuous behavior, but cultivates concentration and wisdom only to a moderate extent. With the complete destruction of 3 fetters, this person is a 7-time at most attainer, who, after roaming and wandering among heavenly beings and humans 7 times at most, makes an end of discontentedness. This is the 9th person, passing away with the residual remaining, who is freed from hell, the animal realm, the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. Who, Sariputta, are those unwise and unskillful wanderers of other communities, and who are those that know one with residual remaining as one with residual remaining, and one without residual remaining as one without residual remaining? These 9 persons, passing away with residual remaining, are freed from hell, the animal realm, the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destination, the lower world. Sariputta, I had not been disposed to give this teaching exposition to the male and female ordained practitioners, male household practitioners, and female household practitioners. For what reason? I was concerned that on hearing this teaching exposition, they might take the ways of complacency. However, I have spoken this teaching exposition for the purpose of answering your question.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So here, the Buddha is essentially setting Sariputta straight to help him see these individuals that have residual clinging in their mind, how they are indeed freed from hell, the animal realm, and the realm of afflicted spirits. Because what he was hearing by these other individuals is that people with residual remaining aren't free from the lower realms. And the Buddha is saying, no, they actually are. And here's 9 examples of where that's the case. The first several, he's talking about a non-returner, someone who actually doesn't come back to the human realm. And typically we talk about that individual that is now going to be reborn into the heavenly realm and attain enlightenment from there. But there's these other aspects of a non-returner as well that the Buddha is helping you understand here, that you can actually attain enlightenment between one life and the next. We don't talk about some of these, right? We usually talk about getting to enlightenment during this life or enlightenment at death. Right? And we talk about being able to get to enlightenment from the heavenly realm. But there's these other ways too. But we just don't go into this detail in a lot of the foundational teachings, that between one life and the next, that the individual hasn't been reborn yet, but in between these lives, an individual can actually get to enlightenment. So they've eliminated the 5 lower fetters, and now they're a non-returner. They're not coming back to the human world, but they will actually get to enlightenment before they're reborn into the heavenly realm. That's the first one that the Buddha is talking about here. The second one, the individual's done the same thing, as they've eliminated the 5 lower fetters, but this person is a attainer of nibbana upon landing. So as soon as they get to that next life, boom, they get to enlightenment right away, right? And this is talking about an individual who's moving towards the heavenly realm, right? And they're actually going to be reborn there. But we can also think about this in terms of the human realm too, because this can happen here too. This is where a being can come into the womb and there can be a miscarriage, but that being could actually have gotten to enlightenment. Or we can have a being who is born, and then within the first day or two they could die, and they could actually have gotten to enlightenment in that period of time. And this is why it's important to understand that just because a being has died at the age of 1 day old doesn't mean something horrible has happened. That could be one of the best things in the world. That being could have gotten to enlightenment, and then they didn't have to live a whole life of misery and despair, that they actually got to enlightenment upon landing into this new life. Right? So this is the second one that the Buddha is talking about, but he's talking about it in terms of someone that's headed for the heavenly realm. This third one, once again, the individual has eliminated the 5 lower fetters, but now this individual gets to enlightenment without extra effort, meaning that it was pretty straightforward for them to get to enlightenment, and they did that from the heavenly realm. The fourth one here, same thing. They're a non-returner, eliminated the 5 lower fetters, but this person, it took quite a bit of effort. And these same things can happen in the human realm too. You can have someone that gets to enlightenment without very much effort. You know, they have a little bit of dust in their eye and they just kind of make their way to enlightenment, you know, within a few years, where you can have other people that really struggle. It can be 10, 15, 20, 30 years before they get to enlightenment. And that's that extra effort that the Buddha is talking about from the heavenly realm. But it can also happen from here in the human realm as well. Then he talks about this individual who's a non-returner, who's eliminated the 5 lower fetters, and this person is headed towards the heavenly realm to be able to get to enlightenment from that realm. Okay, so then he goes into the 6th type of person here. This is a once returner who, coming back, actually makes an end to discontentedness and actually gets to enlightenment in that next life in the human realm. The 7th one that he's talking about here, this is someone who's in the first stage of enlightenment, who's eliminated the first 3 fetters. They're a 1-seed returner or a 1-seed attainer who's going to be reborn in the human realm one more time and get to enlightenment there. Then he talks about this family to family attainer, again, a stream enterer who comes back 2 or 3 more times, gets to enlightenment. And then this one would be the stream enterer who's a 7 times at most attainer. So here he's giving Sariputta these exact examples of someone who still has residual clinging in their mind, but they're not being reborn into the lower realms because these other individuals were saying something different than that. So let me know what questions you guys have. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like, Janae, you have a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
So you've kind of talked about this a couple times, which is like having residual something, like residual craving or something like this. And I'm not fully understanding how someone can have something like a residual craving or a residual remaining.
Sure. So if someone's gotten rid of those first 5 fetters, that's personal existence view, doubt, wrong behavior and observances, central desire, and ill will. But there's that desire for form, or that desire for formless, where an individual wants to still come into the world and be in the world. That's a little residual amount of clinging. It's not significant like what you experience with central desire, when it's like, oh, I just can't leave from this house. There's no way I'm going to move from this house. Or you might be holding on really tightly to a certain friend or family member or something like this. This is like more deep craving, more deep clinging, where the residual amount is just a certain amount, just a little bit, where an individual who's deep in craving, they're going to be deep in the darkness. So the residual is just a residual amount, not a huge significant amount where you experience intense rage and anger and like someone going from 0 to 100 miles with their anger and rage, but instead they still have a small amount of clinging and craving in their mind.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. It looks like, Samantha, you have a question? You were already unmuted and then you muted yourself.
Sorry. In general, people who are on the path, would there be characteristics or indications of whether they would be a once returner or a 7 times, or a family to family, or a one seed, or does it matter?
It matters for you, for your own personal growth, that you know where you're at in your development, because then you'll know what to focus on. If you didn't know the path, then you wouldn't know which fetters to be really focused on. So this path to enlightenment and the way the Buddha lays out the stages of enlightenment, that's like a personal growth plan versus trying to determine other people who's in any particular stage of enlightenment, because that would be one's conceit, trying to look at other people and trying to figure out, kind of jockeying to figure out which stage of enlightenment they're in compared to where you're at. Instead, it's for your own growth. And there is ways for you to be able to discern this. Between the first stage of enlightenment and the second stage, it's not quite as clear, because the fetters that you are working on is sensual desire and ill will. You're thinning those out. And while you'll see a significant decrease in your discontentedness in the first stage of enlightenment, you also see a significant decrease in getting into that once returner, but it's not as clear cut as something like the first stage. Getting into that is very clear cut. Getting into the third stage is very clear cut, because there is no sensual desire, ill will at all. And then, of course, getting into the fourth stage is completely clear cut, because there's no discontentedness whatsoever. So between the first and second stage, it's not always as clear, but you should still be aware of what it takes to go from one to the next, so that you can develop on your own personal growth plan.
So in general, and this makes sense, the further along you are in the stages, the less likely you are to be a 7-time returner versus a 1-time returner.
Yes, that's correct. If you've developed your mind and you've gotten progress, if I'm in the first stage of enlightenment, am I a 7 times at most attainer? Am I a family to family attainer? Am I a 1 seed attainer? The only way for you to be able to discern this is to be able to have seen your past lives. And if you will have seen your past lives, you will be able to discern that. But in this particular life, if you've gotten into the first stage of enlightenment, you're in the first stage of enlightenment. You're not going to be able to determine what type of stream enter you are out of those 3. But you will be able to determine when you've gotten to like the third stage of enlightenment. Getting to that second stage, you will have less clarity on that, because there's not as much of a hard indication to know, but it at least helps you to be able to see what fetters to start focusing on.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, Janae, you have a question?
So at the end of this chapter, it talks about how he wasn't like as interested in sharing this teaching because it could lead to complacency. But I don't really see how this could lead to complacency. So
yeah, so let me just read this part. So he says, I was concerned that on hearing this teaching exposition, they might take it the ways of complacency. However, I spoke this teaching exposition for the purpose of answering your question. So if somebody knows that they could have residual clinging and they will potentially get to enlightenment between their individual lives, between one life and the next, someone might get complacent in that, I've eliminated 5 fetters, so I'm just going to hang out here because I'm going to kind of bank on this opportunity of maybe getting to enlightenment between this life and the next. So I'm not going to put forth that extra effort to actually eliminate the 5 higher fetters. The mind can become complacent in this situation. So that's why the Buddha says that, hey, he's concerned about people potentially gaining this complacency if they realize that there is the ability for you to be able to get to enlightenment, still having the higher fetters in your mind. You could still potentially get to enlightenment between this life and the next, or upon landing, or so forth and so on. And that's what he's talking about here. Whereas if You just are like, okay, I understand this is the case. Thank you, Mr. Buddha, for sharing this with me. But I'm going to keep my goal as enlightenment and getting to an arahant and eliminating all 10 fetters, because I would like to enjoy that mental state for the rest of this life. That's what you would like to do. Don't allow the mind to become complacent here.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me see if we have anything on Facebook or YouTube. All right, I'm not seeing anything there. So let's go to the last chapter for today. This is chapter 40. I think this one is dependent origination. Let me see if there's any added insight here that we can glean. Well, let's just read it and see. We've got dependent origination at the top, and then we've got some more stuff. It looks like Pat's volunteering to read that. You've been reading dependent origination now for several classes, so you should be well versed in this.
I like it. A stream enterer knowing and seeing in these ways. Good, monks. So you say thus, and I also say thus. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the elimination of this, that is eliminated. That is, with the elimination of ignorance comes elimination of volitional formations. With the elimination of volitional formations, elimination of consciousness. With the elimination of consciousness, elimination of name and form. With the elimination of name and form, elimination of the sixth sense base. With the elimination of the sixth sense base, elimination of contact. With the elimination of contact, elimination of feeling. With the elimination of feeling, elimination of craving. With the elimination of craving, elimination of clinging. With the elimination of clinging, elimination of existence. With the elimination of existence, elimination of birth. With the elimination of birth, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair is eliminated. Such is the elimination of this whole mass of discontentedness. 1. Monks, knowing and seeing in this way, would you run back to the past thus? Were we in the past? Were we not in the past? What were we in the past? How were we in the past? Having been what? What did we become in the past? No, Venerable Sir. 2. Knowing and seeing in this way, would you run forward to the future thus? Shall we be in the future? Shall we not be in the future? What shall we be in the future? How shall we be in the future? Having been what? What shall we become in the future? No, Venerable Sir. 3. Knowing and seeing in this way, would you now be inwardly confused about the present thus? Am I? Am I not? What am I? How am I? Where has this being come from? Where will it go? No, Venerable Sir. 4. Monks, knowing and seeing in this way, would you speak thus? Our teacher is respected by us. We speak like this out of respect for our teacher. No, Venerable Sir. 5. Monks, knowing and seeing in this way, would you speak thus? Our ascetic says this, and so do other ascetics. It is only because of them that we say this. No, Venerable Sir. 6. Monks, knowing and seeing in this way, would you acknowledge another teacher? No, Venerable Sir. 7. Monks, knowing and seeing in this way, would you return to the observances, intense debates, and superstitious rites of various ascetics and Brahmins, taking them as most important aspects of the holy life? No, Venerable Sir. 8. Monks, do you speak only of what you have known, seen, and understood for yourselves? Yes, Venerable Sir. Good, monks. So you have been guided by me with this teaching, which is visible here and now, immediately effective, inviting inspection, onward leading, to be experienced by the wise for themselves. For it was with reference to this that it has been said, monks, this teaching is visible here and now, immediately effective, inviting inspection, onward leading, to be experienced by the wise for themselves. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So here the Buddha is talking about the stream enterer in knowing dependent origination, right? That's from the first part here, which we've studied before. And now, having studied dependent origination, the Buddha goes through these various questions, because if you've deeply penetrated dependent origination, there's a certain answer that you would answer here. So having studied dependent origination, would you essentially be going to the past and worrying about the past and thinking about all these different things that you've done in the past? And the students say, no, we're not interested in that stuff. Okay, well, would you run to the future and think about all these things in the future and worry about the future of all these different things in your next lives? This is what he's talking about, past lives and future lives. And the answer is no, could care less, right? Because we understand dependent origination. Okay, so what about this? Would you know, upon seeing this particular teaching, would you be inwardly confused about the present moment? Essentially, how did you get here? No, not confused about that, because I understand dependent origination, fully understand how I got here into this existence. Okay, well, knowing and seeing dependent origination, would you speak thus? Our teacher is respected by us, and we speak like this out of respect for our teacher. In other words, we're only speaking about dependent origination out of respect for our teacher. Yeah, we don't really know it that well. We haven't really seen it very clearly. Just because our teacher says it's important, we're going to kind of talk about it. No, they're not going to do that because they've deeply seen it themselves. They're not just talking about dependent origination because the Buddha taught it to them. They're talking about it and they know it to be true. It's not out of respect for their teacher. Okay, well, knowing and seeing dependent origination, would you say that it's just because of this other aesthetic, this other student, this co-student, these other aesthetics? Would you just be talking about dependent origination because of them, because you're kind of honoring and respecting them? Nope, wouldn't be talking about dependent origination because of them. Okay, well, would you, knowing dependent origination, would you be able to acknowledge another teacher? Now that you've seen this step-by-step process of exactly how you come into the world and why you experience discontentedness, would you be able to acknowledge somebody else as being your teacher? Nope, wouldn't be able to do that because the Buddhist teachings are so deep and profound, it explains exactly how they got to where they are today. So they wouldn't be able to acknowledge another teacher. Okay, so knowing and seeing dependent origination, would you be able to return back to those rites and rituals and ceremonies, those superstitious things? Would you be able to go into these intense debates and arguing and fighting with people? Would you be able to do those kinds of things and consider that these rites and rituals and superstition is really important for you to be able to develop this holy life? Nope, wouldn't be able to do any of that stuff either, because you know that it's the cultivation of wisdom that is going to lead you to the elimination of discontentedness and elimination of rebirth. So wouldn't be able to go back to those rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. Wouldn't be able to go argue with other people because you already know the truth. No need to argue with other people that you already know the truth. Okay, well, do you speak about these things because you know them, you've seen them, and you've understood them for yourselves? Yep, sure do. That's exactly why, right? So now the Buddha just kind of sums this up with saying, okay, you've been guided in this teaching by me. It's directly visible here and now, meaning you can exactly independently verify it. It's immediately effective, that you can integrate it into your own life. It's inviting introspection, meaning it's inviting you to come examine it. It's not something that you would believe. It's onward looking, meaning it's helping you to be able to see what's happening in this actual world and then to be experienced by the wise for themselves. Meaning through your own direct experience, you can be able to independently verify this. For it was with reference to this that it has been said, monks, this teaching is visible here and now, immediately effective, inviting introspection, onward leading to be experienced by the wise for themselves. So here he's just kind of laying out all these questions that you can answer for yourself. And if you can't answer these questions in the way that the Buddhist students were answering them, that's okay. But you need to penetrate dependent origination more closely and cultivate the wisdom of each individual aspect and how it all interlinks. Because if you couldn't answer in the same way as these students, that means you just haven't penetrated dependent origination enough. And that's what this type of discourse does to help you, is you can see how an individual who has penetrated dependent origination would answer these questions. And if you're not able to answer them in that way, then just work more with dependent origination until you deeply understand it and reach out as you need help. So let me know what questions you guys have here. This is chapter 40. This is our last one for today. Looks like Marcy has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. I actually have a question about attachment to the Buddha's teachings. I'm not sure. I don't think it really relates to what we're covering here today. I don't know if maybe this might be a question you might want to take after class. I'm not sure.
Others could benefit from it if it's something that you think that you'd like to ask.
So I had a conversation with one of my children, and they had pointed out to me, they said, oh, well, you just have attachment to your Buddha's teachings. And I kind of just like giggled and like was like, I didn't feel there was an attachment. I just felt that there was just clarity about understanding. And basically what it came about is that, you know, my child or the child was having these racing thoughts about, certain things in the world and how the world should be conducted, and, you know, how the removing of certain people within the world would make the world a better place. And I just simply was saying that, you know, expounding on that time it would take for you to try to change the world, if you took that energy and effort and applied it to your own self inwardly, it would be much easier. And that's when it came up about like, well, you just have an attachment to your Buddhist teachings. And I was like, not really. It's more the fact that I have gained this wisdom and understand the teachings and have confidence in knowing that the way I practice these teachings has brought about so much fruitful benefits that I can see that it is the teachings, and mainly starting by practicing meditation. And that's where it came down to, where it was like, you know, really training the mind to let go and be able to concentrate on one thing at a time has been groundbreaking to the mind. So I just didn't know it's not even like I want to even prove to them. It's just, you know, how do I help them gain the insight to understand that it's not an attachment to the Buddhist teachings, it's an understanding, it's a confidence in them.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. In that situation, it sounds like that person's mind was not prepared to talk. So in the moment, it doesn't make sense for you to say anything. As soon as you see someone get hyped up like that, just walk away. There's nothing you're going to be able to do in that situation. So you don't have to prove anything to anybody. You don't have to convince anybody of anything. Oftentimes what the unenlightened mind does is when it's struggling with its own challenges, it will kind of lash out at an individual that's around you. And the way that they lash out is they lash out through what they're seeing in their own mind. So someone might claim that you're being egotistical or that you're being selfish or something like that. In reality, it's coming from their own mind. So in their own mind, it's very likely that they were attached to their views and opinions. And when your view or opinion was different than theirs, them being attached by railing up like that, they're saying you're attached to the Buddhist teachings, when in reality, they're very well attached to their own opinions and views. And in that situation, when their attachment's triggered, that's when the harshness and the bitterness and the hostility is going to come up, and it's not the proper time to talk. It's better to just walk away. And if this is someone like your child who you think that they would heed your advice at some point, maybe you wait a few hours, maybe you wait a few days, a week or two, and you come back and say, hey, you mentioned this, is that something you would like to talk about? And then if they say, sure, let's talk about it, then you could talk and help them to understand, because it's a different time and it's a more proper time to talk. Whereas if they say, no, I'm not interested in talking about it, okay, and you're done with it and you don't talk about it anymore. But in the moment, it doesn't make sense to really talk about it because their mind has craving that's risen up. And also, you're not here to convince anybody of anything. The thing that's going to be the most impactful to the people around you starting to decide to understand the teachings is for them to be able to see you becoming more and more peaceful and more joyful. And as they see that occurring, where you have the discipline of your mind, that when they're bitter and harsh and hostile at you, you just smile and walk away, this is going to have more of an impact than you sitting there and trying to convince them of any one thing or another, because they know how you used to function in the past. When they would rail up like that, they knew you would come at them with bitterness and harshness and hostility. And when they see that you've gained the discipline of your mind to just smile and walk away, that's going to have an impact on them. And they're going to start asking you, like, Mom, what are you doing? Like, how can I do some of that stuff?
Well, that was just it. Like, he was asking me questions, but it was almost like, as I was explaining to him, the things that I have done and the teachings that I am practicing, it would, like, he just would go off on a whole nother tangent. And I would, it was difficult because it was like he was asking questions, and I was interested in sharing with him, but then it was almost like he, wasn't really taking in what I was saying. And I was like, it was kind of like, I basically said to him, I said, Todd, at this point, I feel like we're just like in this circle. We keep circling again and again and again over the same topics. And I can't, there's nothing more that I can, explain to you where I'm at. So I don't know where else to go with this conversation anymore, and I love you. But I'm at a loss at this point, and that's kind of like how it kind of like ended. So it was a really a challenge for the mind, obviously, because I know I still have attachment to him because he is my child and I haven't, rid that attachment yet. But it was also a little, frustrating to the mind that I had, this wisdom that I have gained for myself that I was interested in sharing, but it was like I was getting questions, but it was not like what I was sharing was getting through. So it was definitely when we hung up, I was like, woo!
So you do have some attachment there then, because you said you were getting frustrated, right?
Yeah.
So you got some attachment to wanting to teach other people these things that you've learned potentially, or you might have attachment to the teachings of the Buddha themselves. So there is the ability in these kinds of situations where you see it's not the proper time to talk, but you know that it would be helpful for you and maybe for this other person too, is if you can restrain your mind and you can say, Todd, understand you have all these questions right now. I would like to step back and think about this so that I can give you the best answer that's going to help you the most. And because you said you were at a loss and you didn't know what to say. So in those situations, there's no need to keep talking. Instead, just put a pause on the conversation and say, hey, why don't we pick this up another time? I'm going to think about this because I'd like to have a really great conversation with you and ensure that you get what you need. Give me a few days or a week or two and I'll come back to you and we can pick up this conversation then. And that's a really good discipline of your mind to be able to do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Teacher David. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Okay, so next week in this class, we're going to be in the next set of chapters. So we ended with chapter 40 here. The next set of chapters is 41 through 53. We're going to go all the way through chapter 53, which is the end of this book, so that you can read all of those in the coming week. This is going to allow you and I to be able to finish up this book in our next class, and then we'll start the following book, volume 6, which is the Natural Law of Dhamma, in our class after that. Tomorrow in our group learning program, we're going to be in chapter 6, which is titled The Middle Way, Walking the Middle Way. I'm going to be teaching that at 9 a.m. at the temple and 9 p.m. online. So you guys are welcome to attend that. A very simple, very short teaching, but very profound when you apply it to all aspects of your life. And then on Wednesday morning, we have our grand reopening of our center that we just remodeled and refurbished at the temple. So you guys are welcome to attend that. That's going to be New Year's Eve for some of you guys. It's going to still be evening time for you guys. It'll be New Year's Day for us. So if you're at home New Year's Eve in North America or South America or Central America and you'd like to tune in to our ribbon cutting celebration, you're welcome to do that. You'll be able to see our new center. And I'm actually going to be doing meditations with students, and I'm also going to give a talk about the importance of maintaining a temple and why that's important, how that helps us to allow the path to be available for others. So this is a talk I haven't done before. So if you guys would like to tune in for that, you're more than welcome. That's going to be Wednesday morning our time, right? And then Wednesday evening, I'm going to be doing the third part of a 4-part series on Buddhist chanting. So you guys are welcome to attend any of these things. And then now that we're starting back up the new year, I'm going to be starting off with the normal schedule that I normally do, where I'm doing introduction to the teachings of the Buddha, the foundation and the path to enlightenment courses. I'm going to be doing game nights at the temple. I'm going to be doing retreat in January. So we're going to go back to our full schedule, because I don't know if you guys realize, for the last month, I've just been teaching the Sunday, Wednesday, and Saturday classes because of the work that we've been doing at the temple. But now we're going back to our full schedule of all the various opportunities for learning and coming together as a community as we've had in the past. But now we're going to be able to do that again now that our full center and refurbished center is available. And in fact, tomorrow morning, we're going to be moving a lot of our stuff, or all of our stuff, down into our new refurbished classroom. So if there's anybody who's around that would like to come help with that, that's something we're going to be doing tomorrow morning. So thank you all for attending. Thank you for your reading and your volunteering and your questions and all your dedication to learn and grow. Perhaps we'll see you guys in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.